So good morning, afternoon or evening, depending on where you're joining us. My name is Alison Baker and I'm currently the Fund Manager of the Australian Government funded Water for Women Fund, Australia's flagship WASH program. And all the partners involved in that fund would really welcome you here today to this presentation. We hope you're all staying safe and well in these strange times. So before we get started, I've got a few housekeeping things to deal with. First of all, we've got our chat box. So if you have any comments or feedback for us through the process, please put those in there. If you'd like to introduce yourself as we all get started, then please feel free to do that as well. And we will also use the chat for the Q&A session that we'll have a little bit later on. So as you're hearing things and listening to things, please feel free to put those questions into the chat box. We will also be using Mentimeter today. And for those of you that aren't familiar with that, that's an online survey tool, which gives real-time inputs and captures those from participants. So either keep your phone handy or you can do it on your computer as well using menti.com. And when we get to that part, we'll give you the number to enter into the Menti, and then we'll be able to capture your responses. And finally, to ensure greater accessibility for this session, we have live transcript available, and the instructions for doing that are shown on the screen here. And we will also be capturing a recording, but this will allow you to actually follow the transcript as we go through. So hopefully that's useful to some of you. To start with, I would like to follow through with a bit of an Australian tradition, which is an acknowledgement of country. So that's acknowledging the traditional custodians of the country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community, and pay our respects to their elders and leaders, past, present and emerging, and to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people here today. And I would also like to extend that respect to the diverse Indigenous peoples who have connection to the lands from where you are dialing in from today. So to start with, our aim for this session is to have a bit of fun exploring what the future would look like if we have inclusive, sustainable FSM systems that are available to everyone. But probably even more importantly to that, as well as having a bit of fun, is acknowledging the challenges that still remain. We know they're there, understanding what we can do to create that change, and then taking actions towards achieving that vision that we will explore today. A number of the Water for Women partners involved in the fund will share what some of their learning is with us. So what is the vision for the future? And in alignment with the conference and the theme for the conference, who are going to be our future heroes? So to start with, really important part of our vision is access for all, leaving no one behind. That's very much in alignment and a key focus of Agenda 2030, as well as the SDGs. And whether that be women and girls, sexual and gender minorities, ethnic minorities, poor, and other marginalized groups, we want to make sure that all of those people have access to sanitation services and effective fecal sludge management. A really important part of that is not just to have a toilet, but that people are actually involved in the decision-making process regarding the appropriate services that they are going to have access to and use for themselves. So that involvement of community and people in the thinking and planning is a really, really important part of this resilient and transformative future, because in the end, FSM is really about people and the environment in which they live. But just having access to sanitation services isn't enough. The SDGs focus on safely managed systems to treat the fecal sludge management. And while I'm sure a lot of us here today are aware of what the JMP definition is, just to get us all on the same page, that definition is the use of an improved sanitation facility, which is not shared with other households, and where excreta is safely disposed in situ and or transported and treated off-site. So whether that's in a formal or informal settlement in urban areas, or whether it's actually having effective on-site systems in rural settings, having safely managed systems is really, really important to this vision that we see going forward. But it isn't just about technology and infrastructure. Again, it's also about people, keeping them safe and making sure that they have safe work practices as they're dealing with fecal sludge management. But again, that's not enough either. It's really important that we have the commitment and investment to actually make this vision happen. That commitment is not just from any one individual or any one organization. It needs to come from households and it needs to come from communities. And they need to be working together to achieve this vision. Other really, really important stakeholders are also all different levels of government, public utilities, and the private sector as well. It's all of those different parties working together that will help us achieve that vision. But as many of us know, this vision is not necessarily in alignment with reality at the moment. There continues to be considerable environmental impacts, health and safety impacts, and further impacts on people's dignity and human rights. So just to start off with the environmental impacts, we can have leakage and overflow of sewage systems into surrounding land, roadways, contaminating the environment where children may be playing or where gardens may be tended to. Not safe conditions. We can have toilet facilities directly over waterways, polluting rivers and other related water sources in the area. And we still have a whole mix of sewage flows, solid waste flows, impacting drains, just generally creating unsightly conditions around the place, but also impacting those flows of sewage in some of those systems. But it goes beyond that to health and safety impacts on people. Very unsafe work practices with sanitation workers operating in enclosed spaces with no protective equipment at all. And those direct exposures can very much be major health hazards. And as I said a moment ago, that continues on into the impacts of people's dignity and human rights. And I think this photo kind of says it all. This is not a scenario we'd wish for anyone, and I'm sure many of us can share a story about the plight of sanitation workers and the undignified conditions they must operate in. This we need to change. So part of the things and the focus of the Water for Women project is to improve the health, gender equality and well-being of Asian and Pacific communities through inclusive and sustainable wash, of which fecal sludge management is a part of that. We've got NGO projects operating in 15 different countries, also working with 12 different research organizations, bringing together building of an evidence base and research with that practical on the ground experience to really learn and share what are the best approaches to take forward. The fund, as a result of that, is reaching many beneficiaries around the region. But also in the fund, it has a very, very strong focus on gender and social inclusion, both from a WASH access perspective, but also transforming women's lives and other lives within marginalized communities. In focusing on do no harm as we challenge social norms and other inclusive approaches involving marginalized communities in planning and decision making, we're trying to change the role of all people in that planning and decision making, but not just in the WASH sector itself, but also more broadly, so that everyone is actually important and we're leaving nobody behind, both from a WASH perspective, but also from a life perspective. So we're going to explore some of the experiences we're learning within the Water for Women Fund, and we have a number of partners sharing their experiences to date in a few minutes. But before we get to that, we have an opportunity for you to share and create your vision for the future in terms of what you would like to see an inclusive, sustainable FSM sector to look like. So if you go into Menti, so in the chat, we've got the access. So www.menti.com. And when that pops up, it'll ask you for a code. You put that code, so it's 5069516. And as you start to enter things in, we're going to see some of your visions actually start to be shared with all of us. And we'll just leave ourselves a couple of minutes to do that and see what kind of things start to appear. There's no right or wrong. It can be part of that vision, but it's just having a little bit of fun thinking to the future in terms of what we would really like to see around the planet for everybody. I'm just going to wait a minute here and see what starts to pop up. Sometimes it takes a minute for things to actually flow through. It's a being a bit slow at the moment, or people are thinking. Professionalized public services. Yes, oftentimes we think of sanitation as just in a house. Costed sustainable FSM services. Oops, we've flipped back. Behavior change of people. Yeah, boom. That would be great. Like the IT and digital sector. One in which safely managed services are prioritized, financed, and resources progressed. Yeah, there's some great pictures starting to emerge, and I'm sure some of us have lots of really positive experiences to share, and we're drawing some of these visions from that, also recognizing all the not so nice conditions that are out there as well. And I think the whole plight of sanitation workers has definitely come to the fore over the last few years. So hopefully we really can make some of those changes. Yeah, there's some great things starting to come through there, which you can see. So I'm not necessarily going to read them out, but what can we achieve over the next 9-10 years? So as those are starting to come through, now we're going to give you a slightly bigger challenge. And that is to take some of these pictures and visions you're actually working with and put it into one word. So we want to try and create a bit of a Menti word cloud in terms of, when we put all these different visions together, what are some of those key words that actually start to jump out at us? So I've got a team working in the background. Yeah. So this is your chance to capture and think about what that one word could be in terms of that vision for the future. I'm just going to leave that for a moment. It's going to check and see who's introduced themselves as we've gone along. I know this one's quite a hard one to try and get it all into one word. Excellent. There's a lot of big picture words in there, isn't there? Just looking at how can we get that change across the planet. Ingenious, I like that one. Truly inclusive partnerships. So some of it's about a picture and some of it's about our approaches, isn't it? Just going to let that go for another minute or so. Let's see what else comes up. Dignified. Excellent. And achievable. That is a really, really important thing. If we all work together, ideally, we can actually achieve the vision that we're actually setting out to do. Okay. Well, I'm going to stop that there, and we might pop that up at the end and see where we've actually landed if we get a couple of minutes. But what I'd really like to do now is if all our speakers could just pop up on camera. So if you can come off being off camera, I'd like to take a couple of minutes to introduce all our speakers for today. All of these people work as part of the Water for Women Fund, or they're working with organizations as part of the Water for Women Fund. And they're going to share some of their stories and some of their approaches that they're finding successful in their environments, and test and draw out some of those things that, again, help us move in that direction of a great future. So I'm just sort of looking around here. So at SNV, in conjunction with ISF, which is the Institute of Sustainable Futures, based out of Sydney. And we're going to hear from that from that sort of collection of organizations. We're going to hear from Tashi Dorji, who's the WASH and SME advisor from SNV Bhutan. So you might just want to say hello, Tashi, just so that people can see your voice, hear your voice and see you. Yeah, you're on mute, but anyway,
Oh,
you're on mute.
greetings from
Yeah,
Bhutan and hello to
yeah,
everyone.
yeah. Excellent. Thank you, Tashi. We're also going to hear from Tyler Cazzoli, as well as his colleague Rana Sattar as well. But Tyler's going to give the presentation, and then Rana will actually jump in during the Q&A, just to keep it a little bit simpler. So Tyler is the WASH Program Manager from IDE, based in Cambodia, and Rana is the WASH Innovation and Partnership Manager from IDE Cambodia as well, although she's currently in the US, so it's very late for her. So Tyler and Rana, if you would like to say hello, that would be great.
Everybody, happy to be
Hey
here.
everyone.
Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely.
Thanks. And then moving on to RTI, Research Triangle Institute, we have Arnaban Chatterjee, who's the project manager with RTI in India. And he's also joined by a colleague who he works very close with, Nutan Zatar, and she won't be speaking today either, but I'm sure she'll jump in during the Q&A process as well. So if Arnaban and Nutan would like to say hello, that would be great.
Hello, everyone. Good to be here. Thank you so much, Alison.
Thank
Hi,
you.
everyone. Thanks, Alison.
Thank you. And then last but not least, we have Han Nguyen, who's the Vietnam country director with Thrive Networks slash East Meets West. So that's going to be our speakers today, and the Q&A and some of the final wrap up is I'm going to be joined by Juliet Willits, who works out of UTS ISF in Sydney. So Juliet, if you'd like to say hello, then those are the voices and the faces that we're going to hear from over the next little bit. So thank you to all of you, and we'll get started on the presentation. So the first one is going to be from Tashi from SNV. And we have actually organized we've actually recorded all these just to make sure that we stayed the internet connections, we didn't have any issues there. So we're going to hand over to Tashi via his video link and or his pre-recording, and we're going to hear about the professionalization of the rural sanitation slash FSM sector. So handing over to you, Tashi.
Hello and Kuzu Zampula to everyone. My name is Tashi Dorji and I am the WASH and Private Sector Advisor in SNB Bhutan. It's such a great pleasure and honor for me to share the vision of our rural sanitation services and in smaller district centers. Very often in the rural areas, since the responsibility of sanitation is devolved to the households, the focus is on the total sanitation to end open defecation rather than safely managed services. Therefore, our vision is for a professional sector with regulations in place supporting citizens and planning for resilience. There are three key things in our vision: professionalization of the rural sanitation sector, informed citizens, and resilient services. By professionalization of the rural sanitation sector, it's not only about achieving total sanitation or open defecation free, but rather a change in mindset for achieving higher standards. This requires capacities of stakeholders at all levels, having clear roles and mandates with better trained staff, effective regulations and monitoring systems in place, having appropriate infrastructures that are resilient, and use of equipments such as PPEs, And the tailored solutions and approaches are all based on using available data. Example in Bhutan's context, beyond ODF, data was used to inform rural approaches to understand access to safely managed. The result from the Sustainable Sanitation and Hygiene for All survey indicated that 78.5% of fecal waste was being safely managed. That's mainly because of the approach in promoting single leach pit, upgradable to an alternating twin pit, seen as lower risk options. The understanding was then translated into development of national guideline for fecal sludge management and updated behavior change communications. Beyond the triggering demand in the communities, sanitation service providers, including private sectors, need to ensure that citizens understand the full service chain and also how to manage their facility safely. They need to be informed as there are issues related to fecal waste either not safely contained or not safely emptied. Example, in mountainous and remote areas, the cesspool truck services is not at all a practical solution. An appropriate technology needs to be promoted, and equally capacity and skills of village masons in constructing such toilets. Dissemination of information to households through simple pictorial DIYs on safe containment and pit emptying. The use of protective gears and is important while carrying out the services, and also on is availability in the market. Citizens are aware of the regulations and standards. We are happy that Bhutan is the only carbon negative country today. Yet we experience water sources drying up, scarcity of water issues, flash floods and landslides causing damages to infrastructure and disruption on the wash services. Overwhelmingly, as you can see from the picture, the household's technology of choice is poor flush. And increasingly, there are areas with water scarcity issues. Vulnerable and marginalized groups are more susceptible and disproportionately affected by climate change impacts. Our vision is to recognize these issues and the vulnerability of the marginalized groups, reinforce the implementation of pro-poor support mechanisms and strategies, already think about climate resilient hardware and technologies through combination of local and outside scientific knowledge, and ensuring an inclusive decision making and governance arrangements are in place. So in a nutshell, this is our vision for rural sanitation sector, a professionalized sector with citizens fully informed and having plans for resilient services. Thank you so much for listening and have a great day.
Thank you so much, Tashi. That was it was a great presentation that really gave that clarity. As you say, oftentimes we think of rural areas, ODF is the way to go, although with safely managed, it's sort of pluses. But your vision is taking it much further beyond that and giving us some real specific ways that we can actually do that. So thank you for sharing that. And I'm sure there'll be some questions when we get to that a little bit later. So if there's anything in particular you want to ask Tashi, then please make sure you you capture that in the chat. So we're going to stay in the rural context at the moment. Oftentimes when we think of FSM, we think of the urban area. So we thought we'd start in the rural area. So I'm going to hand over now to Tyler. Again, we've recorded it to make sure that we didn't have any internet issues. So I'm going to hand over to Tyler, who's going to explore more the sort of the market side of things and how we can develop a supply chain with respect to FSM and those kind of facilities, and in doing so, really build on the entrepreneurial spirit in some of these countries. So handing over to Tyler.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tyler Kozol, and I'm the WASH Program Manager at IDE Cambodia. If you don't know IDE, we do market-based development. Our mission is to create income and livelihood opportunities for low-income rural households. We say that we're powering entrepreneurs to end poverty. We work in 14 country programs around the world with programs in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And we work in WASH, agriculture, access to finance, and climate resilience. In Cambodia, our WASH program is called the Sanitation Marketing Scale-Up Program. And one of the core things that we do here is human-centered design. We do deep user-centered research to identify motivations, barriers, constraints for why households do or don't invest in sanitation. We then use those insights to develop low-cost aspirational products, and we support businesses, we train them to be able to produce them, to install them, to deliver them, and we also support them to learn better about business in general and manage their business more sustainably in their own right. We have sales agents that we deploy at the same time, and these sales agents are going around the country and conducting presentations, generating demand for these products. When an order is made, the sales agent will send that order to a business, and the business will fulfill it, deliver it, and develop a relationship with that customer. This is how we do behavior change, and it's how we catalyze a market here. So IDE has been doing sanitation marketing in Cambodia for nearly 12 years now. And when we arrived, sanitation coverage was around 23%. Now, sanitation coverage is around 78%. And so the basic sanitation market is drying up quickly. We know that. Unfortunately, also that means that latrine pits are filling up quickly. And we know that in order to secure any gains that we've achieved through an increase in sanitation coverage, we need to safely manage what's in these pits now. If not, we're going to be risking a backslide in public health related gains that can disproportionately affect the most vulnerable households. So one of IDE's solutions to this is the alternating dual pit product. What happens is when a business will arrive at this household, they'll first mix in hydrated lime to that full first pit. This helps kill pathogens and reduces the risk that any household is going to be exposed to them. After this, we disconnect that old pit and install a new one, but also we install this pit gauge product inside, which has a visual indicator to help households identify the level of sludge within their pits and really react proactively rather than reactively to their FSM situation. After this, we advise the household to not empty that old pit for as long as it takes, ideally, at least until that new pit is full. After this, which we expect takes between 2 and 5 years, a household should be able to empty that pit and should be able to do it more safely and use it for agriculture or just bury it. We have sold now 13,000 of these products in rural Cambodia, and we do intend to conduct follow-up research about whether or not these pits are operating the way that they should and whether or not households are behaving as appropriate to make sure that they're being safely, their waste is being safely managed. So a last note on behavior and FSM. At IDE, we're behavioralists. We use human-centered design and focus on behaviors to give us hints about opportunities in the future to increase public health gains. And two behaviors that we've seen lately have been households putting holes in the side of their pits, their full pits to let wastewater drain. We've seen this more and more lately. We also see households more and more opening their full latrine pits during floods to let that floodwater carry their waste out. We know, due to a survey that we conducted in 2019 with over 1,500 households, that households who practice these two unsafe behaviors are much more likely to live in climate-vulnerable, flood-prone areas. On a national level, these are among the most vulnerable households, and they're only going to become more and more so as climate change worsens. So what this tells us is that in order to truly leave no one behind with health improvements related to improved sanitation, additional focus needs to be put on feasible and affordable technological and behavioral solutions in challenging environments. So this is our vision, that context-based combinations of behavior, accessible products and services, and market-based delivery channels can increase the accessibility of FSM in rural areas. If you're curious to learn a little bit more about that research I mentioned, we do have a poster presentation at this conference as well. So a bit of a shameless plug, but feel free to check that out. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tyler, for that great overview of what you have done in Cambodia. And I'm interested, we might explore some questions later as to how you might transfer that to other places. But again, I think sort of drawing out, it came out in Tashi's conversation, but again, yours, that importance of changing behaviors, needing the right technologies, but having that broader systems approach as well, whether it's a market or whether it's bringing other parties into that, such as the government. So anyway, some themes already starting to emerge out of those presentations. So we're now going to move from more of a focus in the rural area to the urban areas. And to kick us off as part of that process, I'm going to hand over to Anirban Chatterjee from RTI in India, and he will be sharing some of his insights, but also bringing in the insights of some of the partners that they're working with in India as well. So handing over to Anirban.
Good morning, afternoon, evening, based on wherever you're joining in from. My name is Anirban Chatterjee, and I'm the project manager for RTI International's Water for Women Fund initiative in India. RTI International is a 60-plus-year-old independent, non-profit research institute dedicated to improving the human condition. It is my pleasure to share how RTI is supporting the Water for Women Fund to achieve this. There are several literature and studies which conclude that almost 70% of investments towards SDG 6 goal achievement must come from the private sector. Currently, it stands at roughly 10%. Our Water for Women Fund initiative in India is known as the WASH Hub, and its objective is to enhance private sector engagement and funding in WASH. We do this by creating an enabling market ecosystem and forging collaboration amongst stakeholders to develop WASH projects. Ensuring access to finance is critical for such project development, and today I would like to share a short case study on this. Let us take the example of public toilets. The sector is almost entirely government funded, and often toilets become defunct due to inadequate cost recovery. One of the leading players in this sector is ERAM Scientific Solutions, the pioneers for e-toilets in India, who have been working in the public toilet and FSM space with 4,000 plus installations over the last decade. They have been a commercial partner under BMGS Reinvent the Toilet Challenge and part of 2020 Toilet Board Coalition cohort. To tide over the crisis engulfing prevailing business models around public toilets, the WASH Hub collaborated with ERAM to pilot a business model called MESH, or Micro Enterprise for Sanitation and Health, which combines a revenue-generating shop beside a public toilet. The underlying premise of this model is that revenues from the shop would be adequate to cover the cost of both the toilet as well as the shop. Moreover, ERAM is prompting this investment into this model by women and transgender entrepreneurs who can leverage prevailing employment generation and entrepreneurship schemes of the government, especially meant for the urban poor. To learn more about this program, it is my pleasure to introduce to you today Mr. Vinod Subramaniam, CEO of ERAM Scientific Solutions. Welcome to FSM 6, Vinod. My first request to you would be to please share what kind of financing strategy has been adopted for your ongoing pilots in Odisha. Was blended finance involved? Over to you, Vinod.
Thanks, Anirban. Fine. We will explain you the model we did in Odisha. This model can leverage a mix of government funds, capital, credit subsidy schemes of government, philanthropic contributions, equity from entrepreneurs, commercial loans, and other microfinance instruments. So ERAM is now working with several entrepreneurs and helping them to leverage government schemes to this program. That said, need for blend finance was felt as a kind of a financial literacy of SHG women remains limited, and as this segment receives less capital at high interest rate. Here, blend finance had to be created by raising funds from like-minded institutions. Some of these were grants-based schemes, and some were repayable at different interest rates, kind of a commercial and market-generated funds.
Okay, all right. Thank you, sir. And of course, it brings me to the next question. Like, how are you envisioning the scale up for MENS? I mean, we do talk about blended finance, but of course, the thought always remains that the dependence on blended finance can only remain for some time. So what are your thoughts on that?
A very early stage to come to a conclusion on this, but we are very confident on this model. We started piloting the units in both states, but for an investor to invest, they would need successful case studies, right? That is where these pilots will be very crucial, and we are working on it, taking care of all the aspects and documenting it. We are confident that the success of these early models will help us to convince some of the potential private funders to invest into the mesh program. However, this would potentially take anywhere between 4 to 6 years time frame, and hence in the interim period, if we can avail the need of blended finance in WASH and FSM will remain as one option. Also, private sector face challenges in reaching out to various stakeholders for raising funds. It's not always maybe easy for them to go to a kind of a setup and to initiate the program. As such, a WASH, a blended finance facility, a kind of a welcome project in India. That is.
Thank you, Vinod, for sharing your perspectives. From all of us here at FSM6, we wish you and the entire ERM team all the very best. And that is all from me as well. I'd be happy to reply to any questions that you may have. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Anaban, and for working at that technology to bring some of the voices directly from some of your Indian partners as well. So I think that adds another perspective to some of the things that we've been looking at already, engaging the private sector in a very different way, seeing, as I sort of mentioned earlier, how do we actually bring that investment in? It's not necessarily straightforward or easy, but those are some of the challenges that you're exploring as part of that, and how do we actually scale up some of these interesting combinations of bringing finance from private sector, government, and how do we get those all to work together. So again, I'm sure there'll be some more questions on that as we come up. And yeah, so just a reminder as we're going through this to think of your questions, and we'll come back to the various panelists in a short moment, but we have one more presentation to share before we do that. So now we're actually going to hear from Ha Nguyen, based out of Vietnam, and again, kind of building on some of these multifaceted solutions in urban areas, but drawing from her experience in this case. So now handing over to Han to give us some insights into the work that they're doing.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Hạnh Nguyen, and I'm the Vietnam Country Director with Midwest Tri Network, an NGO with support from Bill and Melinda Gates Foundations and the Australian Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. We use an output-based aid approach to mobilize almost 200,000 households to build hygienic latrines in Vietnam by 2020. Building on that success, since 2017, East Midwest has piloted a fecal slab management project in Bến Tre City in Vietnam. So today I'm going to present about a system approach to provide FSM services for all. Our visions for a more inclusive, sustainable FSM sector by 2030 is that we need to implement or develop a system approach which involve local government, community member, and private sector service provider, which then create an enabling environment with economic incentive for FSM services while supporting and including the most vulnerable households. So for our project's pilot in Vietnam, we have implemented 3 phases where we catalyze partnership with donor, with provincial and city government, with engineering firm, local university, the Vietnam World Unions, and private sector provider. The result of this partnership is the first fecal slab treatment plant in the South Vietnam, which was co-financed by the provincial government as you can see from the photo here. So government remain an important regulator of not only financing but also the health and environmental implications of FSM services. So in these projects, we work closely with the government to assess the cost of the city-wide services for FSM, while supporting and how we can identify pro-poor approaches from perspective of affordability and accessibility. And then we need to examine different cost structure for service delivery model with different options to help government to select the most optimal model. And last, we need to set up with government the service fee and subsidy scheme that can help the underserved household group afford with different service options. So community engagements, we need to make sure that the community members are engaged as consumer of FSM services, and that can help government in designing effective regulatory conditions and reach the poorest of the poor. In these projects, we work with the World Union member to engage the community, educate household customers about FSM, and connect them with the service provider. Leveraging existing private sector providers, we provide on-the-ground network for service delivery with minimal effort of government part and play an important role to ensuring cost-sustainable service model. Engaging private sector also can help stop illegal discharge into the environment of the vehicle waste that's still happening in Vietnam. Last but not least, strengthening operations and maintenance capacity is very important to sustain the services. We will support the city government to develop a standard operating procedure for the whole sanitation service chains, which include guidance on health and safety of sanitation workers. So we work closely with the public utility who also the treatment plant operators and make sure that they are build capacity on O&M as well. With these key activities and partnership of a system approach that we just presented, we believe that we can create an enabling environment with cost sustainable FSM services while supporting the most vulnerable household. And that's our visions for more inclusive and sustainable FSM sector. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Han. That was great. And again, building on that whole systems approach, in particular in the urban environments and how all those pieces need to fit together to create that enabling environment. And again, that importance of engaging communities, but also building on that role of the private sector as well as building capacity within the sector. So we've heard a whole suite of different approaches, very insightful. So thank you to all of the speakers for putting those together and sharing each of your visions. So now we've got a little bit of time for some questions and answers. I'm going to hand over to Juliet to see whether I've actually missed any Q&A. People can put their hand up as well if they feel like actually using their voice, but I'll hand over to Juliet for a minute to kickstart our Q&A.
Great, thanks, Alison, and good evening, everyone, or good morning, wherever you are. I thought maybe a question that it could be to any of you. I was reflecting on Alison's introduction, which was about the Water for Women Fund and the focus on gender and inclusion, and then also the focus that came through in the presentations about involvement of private sector, in almost all the visions of the future. And I'm just interested if any of you would respond on how can we support greater gender equality and inclusion in working with private sector specifically. So are we working with both women and men? Are we working across different parts of society? Are we really making sure there are good working conditions for people participating in that private sector? I just wondered if one of you wanted to comment on that. maybe we could have all the speakers with cameras on.
Yeah, I
and
was
then
just going to
it'd be a
say,
bit more of a
yeah,
conversation.
I
can
should have
Yep.
reminded everybody to do that.
Yeah,
So thank you.
Yeah, so is there one of you who's be interested to respond on that? You're going to wait for each other.
I'm going
I
to
can
pick
go
on.
first, Juliet.
Okay,
Go for
Anurag
it.
can go. And then,
Thank you.
I'm not going to pick on somebody. Go,
Go ahead.
Anurag.
So I'll just keep and talk about the example that we presented on ERM. And one of the things over there, what we did is over and over, what we are seeing is there is increasing recognition for gender equality in WASH. And there are government schemes which are really coming up to promote them. But what was very interesting in the case which we piloted in Orissa, the government themselves identified the transgender help group who would be running the MESH program over there, and they were very keen to fund it from their district mineral fund, which is a corpus they retain for developmental activities in that particular region. There were no tenders, no protocols that was there because of the sole fact that the transgenders would be actually owning and operating the unit. They realized that this would be a path-breaking initiative for the state government. So whenever given the option, I think the government also does come forward and promote such business model, which give a lot of power and voice to the marginalized. So that's what the learnings we had from over in India.
Great, thank you. That's quite inspiring in terms of a vision of how things could look different to how they are today. Does anyone else want to add?
Just to share some of the experiences from Bhutan as well, in terms of how we try to ensure that given equal opportunity to everyone. And here in Bhutan, what we do is we are trying to see and explore how women could equally participate in the construction of toilets, for example. And realizing that they play a very important role, because often in the communities, the women used to stay in the house, they look after the family, and also ensuring that if there are any disabled family members in the household, they are the ones who make sure they take care of them. And targeting the masons training that we carry out, the construction of the toilets. When they realize that this training benefits them, then they try to have a toilet technology which can come closer to their households. And then at the same time, also ensuring accessibility aspects in the toilets, like having the raised toilet seat, having larger door space so that any family members could easily access. So that's one area that, at least in the rural context, that we have tried to encourage female participants. And then also in terms of enhancing their livelihood by making sure that they have the skills to even not only their households, but they can go out and also build toilets to enhance their income.
Great, thank you. I wonder, let's just leave a space. We'd love to hear from other participants. If you've got questions, as Alison said, please feel free to put your hand up or to add questions to the chat.
Julia, just sorry, real quick, I do want to tap in briefly on your question about private sector women's engagement.
Yeah, go for it then.
Yeah, so I mean, in our experience, most of the WASH enterprises that we'll deal with, and I believe this must be true everywhere, most businesses are small and medium-sized enterprises. Most WASH businesses are small, most of them are family businesses, and most of them have a role that the female partner in the business is playing. In Cambodia, we see that all the time. And by deliberately focusing on those female entrepreneurs, I mean, we've seen a lot of a lot of really inspiring stories start to come out. I think having cognizance of not encouraging or pressuring women to take unpaid additional burdens is a really important process when we're working with entrepreneurs in general. But some of the really powerful changes that we've seen have involved women paying themselves salaries and tricks like separating household versus business finances so that they're not drawn necessarily into supporting family expenses with their business, which is, you know, their thing. So really, like there are tricks that one can use to be able to give more decision making to oneself in these kind of contexts. And I think being clever about that, but also cognizant of unequal burdens that already exist, those are some important things to be thinking about. So in short, small, medium-sized enterprise support, but cognizance of the power dynamics at play.
Yeah, I would like to say something about that question as well, if you don't mind. Sorry, did you finish, Tyler? Yeah, so for your question, Juliet, I think it's very important for us when we start doing planning and design for projects that we have to look at the context and, you know, using the political economy analysis to understand about different motivations and barriers for different stakeholders, especially about gender equality in, you know, in the community engagements for like providing service to the poorest of the poor or the most marginalized group in the communities. So I think when we look at that, we have to identify what is the most appropriate, like pro-poor, you know, approach for that context. So it's very different from city to city or from, you know, community to community. So we have to understand about, you know, different, you know, conditions and advantages of different groups. And when we come up with that stakeholder analysis, we think, you know, in our, you know, sphere, like the institutional sphere in Vietnam, we have to think about what is the most influential change agents for our interventions and make sure that we have a long-term outcomes from the activity and the interventions, even after the project end. So, so in our context, we identify Women Union's member is the most appropriate and most, you know, powerful and most engaged in environmental sanitation for community development. So that's why, you know, you can try to think about what we can do best in that situations, and also like engage the community, but also like we have the top-down approach as well when we look at the regulatory conditions for FSM service delivery to those, you know, target group, which is underserved in a very remote and not accessible areas for currents like making, you know, the chucks and the private sector is working on now. So it's a quite complex exercise, but I think it's very inspiring in a way that, you know, you can think about how we can look at the gender equality as an issue, not only an issue, but also a solutions for us to you know, take advantages of that aspect to create changes in the community and create some voice, you know, from the bottom up as well. So not like solving a problem or issue, but like empower women to become a key actors in that context as well to solve the problem. Yeah.
Great, Heng, thank you. So Alison, there's a couple of questions in the chat box. We got time?
Yeah, I think let's take a couple of those and then we'll go into the breakout groups. So there's the one.
There's one about a pit gauge.
Yeah. Let's go.
So
let's go with that. Yep. Just something. Yeah. Do you want me to read the question? I'll read the question because you were facilitating the other bit. So this is for IDE. Just from a sort of technical and knowledge sort of perspective. So just in terms of the response to the pit gauges in the households, is there demand for it, or is that something that was you sort of thought was a good idea and then sort of promoted it? and are seeing how valuable that is. And I guess just getting that sense of how aware households of the volume of sludge in their pits, and who in the household generally knows that information, just to bring sort of some of that gender piece into it. It's a very good question, and there's a lot of issues in there. But anyway, over to you and for a response on that.
Sure, I'll take that from the IDE side real quick.
Yeah, great, Rana.
So in terms of the pit gauge, just to clarify here, yeah, it was originally put in as a functioning like a visual alarm clock, kind of signaling for households when their pit is approaching for capacity, and to understand, you know, really to be a visual reminder for everybody to kind of pay attention a little bit more, and be more drawn to wash FSM in a general sense. In terms of kind of moving forward and understanding deeper about how these households are actually, how much they're paying attention to it, and how much they're actually, you know, if it is kind of promoting additional, actually switching, for instance, in the alternating dual pit from one pit to another. We are currently in the process of finalizing kind of our a research study that will be conducted in the next year to really understand both the efficacy of the alternating dual pit, as well as in particular some of its components, including the pit gauge, and how the behaviors of the households towards both say, you know, actually alternating between the two pits, as well as you know, looking at the pit gauge, understanding that level. It all kind of connects together, really. But yeah, to kind of sum up, it has drawn attention. It's something that is out there that you know, we definitely explain through sales agents what the functionality is, and how households have been kind of in terms of studying a little bit more about that behavior. That's kind of the next step with more research on the ADP. So stay tuned for more results, hopefully in just a year. So next FSM6 potentially. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Rana. And we're about to move into the breakout rooms, and I want to leave time for people to do that. But just I'm going to sort of paraphrase very quickly. There's another question on this pit gauge thing, seems to be creating a bit of interest. Was that included in any subsidy, or is that something that the households had to cover themselves? There's just, I'm really paraphrasing the question down, but I guess they're just exploring the sort of the affordability piece of that. Was that included in the subsidy that was provided?
So we provide subsidies for kind of the basic latrine model, the easy latrine, as well as soft shelters, which are kind of that first step of having towards a permanent shelter. The pit gauge is currently part of our alternating dual pit, which is not included in the subsidy sales. But, you know, in a sense, that is also of itself a component that LBO, latrine business owners, have on hand and can sell individually in the future as kind of a direct, yeah, kind of a separate model moving forward. But yeah, that's about it.
Okay, thank you. All right. Well, we really want to give everybody a bit of a chance to have a discussion together and explore some of the things that we've heard and next steps. So we're going to break up into groups, 4 different groups. So it'll be, I've got somebody in the background actually doing that. So there'll be about anyway, it doesn't matter how many in each group, but just give you a little bit of a chance to, yeah, just look what struck you in these presentations. What do you think are some of the biggest gaps in the sector that are preventing us from actually taking those next steps? And then what are those things we can actually do, those sort of no regrets pieces. So we've set up a mural and we'll put that in the chat that you can actually go into and put your ideas and thoughts in there. What's most important in this section is you actually get some of that discussion happening. If you can capture, or somebody in your group can actually capture some of those things, then that would be great as well, because that's something that we can come back and share. We're not going to have report backs. the important bit of this next section is to have some of those discussions, but we will come back and get a bit of an indication of what you're inspired to actually do next. So I'm going to stop talking, and the powers in the background are going to put you in a group, and yeah, just really enjoy having a conversation amongst each other about where we can actually go next. So I'll stop M, and you should have something pop up in front of you, join, and click on that, and that will send you where you need to go. Well, there seems to have been a lot of activity on the mural. I hope everybody enjoyed those discussions. I know it was quite short in the end, but I know our group ended up talking about subsidies and access versus use. So even in that short time, we got into some interesting discussions, and yeah, and dealing with some of those big issues of the sector. So we've just got sort of a few minutes left. We've got a couple of things that we really want to do. I can see in the mural there's some activities and no regret steps that people are already starting to actually think about. But as we start to close the meeting, what we thought we would do is again have a bit of a Menti that's a little bit easier for people to see. But what is that one thing that you and your project or organization or whatever you're actually coming from can do to actually commit your vision to a more resilient and equitable FSM sector? So if you can put that code in and start to sort of think about those actions. You've had time in your groups hopefully to start to think about that, but we'll start to see some of those things actually pop up. And as while you're thinking, we'll do a little bit of a wrap up and bringing together some of the different themes that have come through. So to kick off, I'm going to hand over to Juliet for her to give some of her sort of high level reflections and wrap up of today's very in-depth and rich session. Over to you, Juliet.
Great, thank you, Alison, and thanks to participants, the ones in my group and the wider session. So I think if I reflect back to the speakers and some of the themes of the visions that everyone's looking for, it's about equality in terms of ensuring affordable services to all, ensuring equitable participation in private sector roles in the sector. Tashi mentioned changed mindsets, and I think that's something that we could think more about whose mindset needs to change. And in relation to that, in the breakout room just then, we had some input around the important role of politics and politicians. And often we forget to talk about that, as very technically minded people focus more on what needs to be done in terms of whether we have a pit gauge or not, and perhaps on participation. But we were talking about that if we want affordability and we want FSM private sector who can earn money and earn a sustainable living, we need appropriate policy and regulatory settings, and we need politicians who will support tariffs that do help cover costs. And we may need to perhaps engage with them more towards realising our vision. And then another theme that came out through the breakout room I was in was that the idea of partnership and interaction between government roles and private sector roles. It's not just one or the other. We need both to realise outcomes, and I think we heard that quite clearly in Hung's presentation, where she talked about a systems approach to achieving a vision of sustainable FSM. And lastly, I want to circle back to the theme of resilience that came out in the opening presentations from Tashi, and I think also from Tyler, about the poor and the vulnerable, and that climate change is with us, and that we need to give more focus to that. Things are only going to be more difficult for those parts of the population, and unless we give more attention both to the technical solutions in those kinds of areas and also to the financial and economic solutions, then those people are going to miss out. And so in line with the overall theme for this session of transformation and leaving no one behind, I think we really need to keep those climate change impacts at the forefront of our attention. So over to you, Alison, if you want to reflect on some of the actions coming through and close things up?
Yes, we'll do. And just a couple of points just to add to what you've just said as well. There was a couple of kind of one-liners that sort of came out through that I thought were really insightful as well. I think it was out of the IDE presentation, sort of powering entrepreneurs to reduce poverty. So really, again, that sort of inclusive side of things. And it was Han that then reflected on, like, let's not actually have gender and social inclusion as an issue. It's actually part of the solution. And I thought that was a really interesting way of coming back to the changing mindset side of things. It's, you know, why does it need to be a problem? It's actually empowering those groups to help be a part of the solution as well. So those are a couple of things that sort of jumped out at me in some of the discussions, but also too that question that you asked in terms of how do we actually make sure that we bring some of that gender inclusion in whether we're dealing with government or you're exploring it from a private sector perspective as well. But just how do we make sure we bring all those different things together? And I think that came out really, really clearly, as well as a whole sort of multifaceted approach to things. So thank you for all the speakers. Thank you, Juliet, for your summary and wrap up. And I've just got the chat in front of the all these different actions that people are going to take forward. And so I'm just trying to, oh, it's gone down on me and I want to try and move it up. Anyway, okay, thank you. Emily is working in the background. So some of the things that people are going to do. So social marketing of dry sanitation, dealing with FSM and a changing climate, drawing on Juliet's point in terms of climate change is with us. We need to have solutions to deal with that. Ensuring innovative NSSS technologies meet safety and performance standards. Yeah, fantastic. Improve private sector technical capacity to produce affordable and desirable FSM services and products. Incentivize and promote projects which cater to marginalized sections of the society. The whole capacity development side of things, thinking about infrastructure for a more resilient, sustainable sanitation. So there's a number of sort of technology kind of things coming out here, which is great. Finding ways to promote FSM as a public rather than a private good. So I guess that's that collective piece. Being inclusive, yes, open spaces where women are empowered by the WSF processes. So some different themes are sort of the technology side of things and some of the inclusion kind of things, climate's there, empowering of women and creating many sustainable models across the state for the state to choose and adopt models. So having choice and flexibility to try and reduce those burdens. Okay, there's some great things in there. A lot of them are a lot more sophisticated than I thought it might actually come out of the short time that we've actually spent together. But I know a lot of people on this call have been thinking about this area for a long time and how we start to gain some momentum and move things along faster than perhaps we have to date. So I'm going to start to sort of wrap up from there. Thank you to all our presenters for sharing your experiences and all the hard work that you're doing in all of your various contexts. Thank you for everybody that's come and listened and your questions and being an active part of the discussion. And I hope everybody's had a little bit of fun. As Juliet said, we often sort of get bogged down or we're focused on our technical problems or whatever issues that's in front of us, but giving us a little bit of time and space to sort of step outside that, think about what we would like to see at the future, and then start to create those actions that we can actually apply in our day-to-day work to actually take that forward. So a big thank you to everybody. I hope you have a good evening or day or afternoon, depending on where you're coming from. But thank you again for coming to join us. And if you want to know anything more about sort of Water for Women, or in particular some of these projects, we do have a website that you can access through as well. And many of us are actually at the conference, so feel free to come and ask us any questions as well. So again, thank you. And for me, it's a good evening, but good day. And thanks again.